In this episode, we will talk about 29 alleged Maoists killed in an encounter in Chhattisgarh. We will also talk about parliamentary elections in Maldives and their significance for India. But first, we will talk about India's first general elections. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. India's very first general elections, which took place more than 72 years ago, at a time when West was rather skeptical about India's experiment with democracy. The first elections were a monumental task both in terms of the size of the nation and the scale of illiteracy at the time. But despite the challenges, the result was a success and received a lot of attention from media and publications around the world. With the 18th Lok Sabha polls currently underway, we speak to Indian Express's Adrija Roychowdury about how the rest of the world wrote about India's very first polls. So Adrija, tell us when and how were India's first elections held?
So to begin with, the first elections were held between October 1951 to February 1952, which was a fairly long period of time. So it was held in multiple phases, and it's supposedly one of the longest elections in the history of electoral democracy in India. But more interestingly, the preparation for it, it started way back in November 1947, which is just a few months after the independence of the country, and even quite a few months before the constitution, in fact, comes into effect. And it was this, very humongous exercise because, in this case, India was to go for universal adult franchise, and they didn't have a colonial legacy to fall back on. So, it had to imagine this entire exercise of a universal adult franchise all by itself without any precedent of another decolonized country that has recently gone through elections or any legacy being left behind by the colonial rulers. And even though before independence, we did have elections. Most of them were restricted to certain ruling elites, and the way the elections were done at that time had more to do with strengthening the colonial administration. So for India right now, it was really a huge and a novel exercise, and there was a lot of skepticism around this as well.
Right. So what were some of the concerns that were raised, and what were people worried about?
So we can say that there were two main kinds of concerns. One is this, that do we even have the administrative machinery required to carry out an exercise as large as this in a country as diverse as India? And you have to keep in mind that this is the 1950s, and there were areas that were as remote as the ones, higher up in Ladakh or say the Northeast, where you had to install polling booths. You had to get enough administrative machinery spread across everywhere, which was really quite a challenging task. So there was skepticism as to whether a country as diverse as India can even carry out an exercise of this size and the kind of challenges involved in this. This was one main concern. And the other main concern was whether ordinary people in India were even, and majority of whom were, mind you, illiterates. So whether they were even capable of making a rational choice of a leader. So that too was a concern. Also keeping in mind the fact that a large parts of what we now see as the contours of India were made up of, more than 500 princely states who were under monarchical rule until now. So for them to switch to democratic elections, it would be, an experiment of sorts. It was the first time that people from these princely states would be exposed to the idea of democracy by having to go and vote for a leader. So whether or not, an electorate of this kind, who were largely A, illiterate, B, never exposed to democracy, can even select a leader through rational means, was the second concern.
But once the elections were conducted, they were considered a raging success. There was a massive turnout. How was India's first election reported about in the international media and publications?
So, I did go through a number of American and British press reportages on the first Indian elections. And of course, there was a lot of praise, for the way the elections were carried out. I mean, I don't think the international press really shied away from, wholeheartedly praising India for carrying out the first elections in such a successful manner. And the headlines, they sort of capture the spirit of this applause that the West was showering on India at that time. For instance, I saw this article from the New York Times in January 1952, which called it an unprecedented experiment in democracy. And the excerpt read, "History's biggest free elections now going on in India offer a challenge to all of Asia." So clearly there was this sentiment that, this is like a historic moment because India is going for elections, which is one of the largest democracies and one of the biggest decolonized nations of the world. Then there's another piece by the Manchester Guardian, which is a British publication, which reported in February 1952 that if ever a country took a leap in the dark towards democracy, it was India. Which again, I thought, there was this sense that, look, isn't this such a magnificent thing that a country like India could carry out elections this way? And again, a majority of these reports also applauded India for carrying out these elections in a very fair manner, despite having a largely illiterate population, the fact that they showed orderly behavior and, there was very less corruption involved, there was very less violence involved. These things were also reported. To some extent, I also thought, this kind of reportage was also being a little patronizing, in the sense that saying that, see, even in a country like India, where people are largely illiterate, most of them have shown orderly behavior. So there was this sense of, patronizing the country that also came.
And could you cite some more instances of this happening where you can clearly see the Western gaze?
There was one more article from the New York Times, which I thought was remarkable. It was written by this journalist called Robert Trumbull, who was a staff writer at the New York Times at that moment. And he sort of listed out some of the quirky instances he saw while reporting the elections. And he said that, these were suggestive of the problems encountered in imparting democratic political education to an illiterate population. So it's almost as if, you have to really educate these people in the act of democracy. And one of the incidents that he reported is also quite symptomatic of the foreign gaze in, just looking at the elections from the Western point of view, in which he speaks about, a group of young women who were exercising their franchise for the first time. And this is happening in Ambala, and how they remove their sandals before entering the polling booth one by one. And then they pay obeisances to the ballot box. And the writer says that, as if it were a god. So you can also sense, I almost had a smile on my face while reading this article, because you can sense that, how much of a foreigner's gaze was going there in reporting an incident like this.
Also, Adrija, you mentioned that India straight away went for universal adult franchise, which allowed both men and women to vote. Did these publications comment on that?
So in the first general elections in India, all adult women voters were eligible to vote, which was quite historic, given that, in Britain and Ireland, for instance, there was a huge struggle to allow women voters. And the Irish Times is quite, adept in recording this and applauding it as well, because it has a headline which says Indian elections could be housewives' choice. And then it goes on to explain that, out of the 17.5 crore voters, 8.5 crore are women who were eligible to vote, which is quite a magnificent number. And consequently, women were a key factor in the electorate, and political parties were, sure to reach out to them and please them during the election campaigning, which, as the report in the Irish Times suggests, was quite remarkable. And as I said, given the fact that in Ireland, there was quite a struggle for women to get the voting right, and there was an extra layer of appreciation for the fact that, in India, women were able to vote. All women, all adult women were able to vote right from the first election onwards.
Right, and as we've seen through the pages of history, whenever voting rights were talked about in the West, they were mostly associated just to the men of the society, at least at the beginning. But India opting for universal adult franchise was quite the shock for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Adrija, this was also the time of the Cold War. The United States and Britain were especially concerned about the rise of communism. And after the elections, the CPI did manage to show some success in the southern states. So did we see these countries react to that?
So clearly, America right now, it sort of overreacts, and it is really concerned about the fact that, communism is making significant progress in India. And most of the American publications, in fact, are more obsessed with the spread of, communism in India rather than reporting on the Congress parties or Nehru's win. Most of the newspapers over and again emphasize on how communism is, taking roots in the country and spreading across the southern part of the country. They also blame it on the economic condition in India. So I spoke to this professor from King's College London, Professor Paul McGarr, and he explained to me how soon after the elections, America reacted so much that it immediately asks for more economic aid to be given to India. And in a year or so, just after the elections, there is a deal that is struck between Washington and Nehru and on an extra $50 million to be given to India in terms of economic aid, because there was this idea that the Communist Party is able to succeed because it is campaigning in the rural parts of India. And one of the basis of their campaign is the fact that there isn't enough economic progress happening in these parts of the country. And, and hence people are turning more towards communism. So, yeah, there is this, fear that India will go the China way. And so also, the communist revolution in China happens in 1949, which is like just 2 years before. And America is again very, very concerned about the fact that, if communism happens to succeed more in India, then this too will go the China way.
Also, in the beginning, you mentioned the princely states. So how did they fit into all of this, and did they take part in the elections?
So actually, when it came to the princely states, again, the foreign publications were, noting their presence. And given the fact that, there were so many of them who had just acceded to India a few years ago. So this was going to be their first exercise of democratic elections. In fact, one of the professors I spoke to, Taylor Sherman, she had told me that, in Hyderabad, for instance, which was one of the biggest princely states, they actually carry out a phase of fake elections or mock elections, for people to get a hang of, how to vote. So that happens before the actual elections happen. And once the elections are going on, there are a number of foreign publications that do point out to the fact that, the princely states are going to vote for the first time. And most importantly, the fact that many of the ruling elites from these princely states, the people who came from these princely families, they were also sort of trying their hands out in democratic politics, the legacy of which continues till now. A lot of these people from the princely families, they were trying out their hands in democratic politics, and which was also quite obvious because they already had a lot of support from the local population in each of these states. So for them, it was a good time to, try out their hands in democratic politics. So, for instance, there was this headline from the New York Times that I read, which basically went princely plottings. This is all that it said, the headline, noting the fact that, many of these princes are now trying out their hands in modern politics. Then, of course, once the elections are over, there are two of the princes that happen to win. One is the Maharaja of Bikaner and another the Raja of Bilaspur. And again, a number of publications, they are reporting on the fact that, these Maharajas have won. So again, one of the stories from the New York Times, it says that hated ex-rulers elected in India, which I quite found it fascinating because I wonder why the word hated was used over here, refer to them or what the publication's idea of these princely states was. It's really a matter of curiosity to me.
And Adrija, we've been talking about the Western publications so far, but how did countries closer to us react to these elections?
So, the elections in India was also held up by many of the Western powers as a sort of a token of, what happens in India will get replicated in the rest of the colonized world. So in places like, say, Malaya and Indonesia, which also, were under colonial rule, these elections were a matter of huge pride. Of course, there was this apprehension about what is going to happen, but also once it turns out to be a huge success, there is also this, element of, there's the sentiment of huge pride that these countries have, because now these elections in India were proof that if India can do it, so can the other parts of the colonized world can. And now we have proof to tell these colonial masters that we too can exist as efficient democratic countries, without really being patronized by the colonial masters all the time.
And next we talk about the latest Maoist encounter in Chhattisgarh. Last Tuesday, just a couple of days before the Lok Sabha polls were going to begin in the region, at least 29 alleged Maoists were killed in a gunfight with the security forces in Chhattisgarh's Kanke district, which lies within the Bastar division. The operation was the largest in terms of the bodies recovered since the state was formed in 2000, and among the biggest successes for security forces in their decades-long fight against left-wing extremism. To learn about how the encounter unfolded and its significance, we have Indian Express's Jayprakash S. Naidu joining us in this segment. Jayprakash, can you begin by telling us a little about how widespread of an issue Naxalism is when it comes to Bastar and Chhattisgarh as a whole?
Yes, so Naxalism came to Chhattisgarh in the 1980s. Most of the leaders were from undivided Andhra Pradesh. At present, Naxalism is spread in Bastar region. It comprises of 7 districts. And just to give you an idea, the Bastar region is larger than the state of Kerala in size. And there's a place called Abujmad. Now this place is larger than Goa in size, and the government is still not surveyed the land. Like 90% of the land is unsurveyed. So there is administrative vacuum and there is security vacuum. So this is the hardcore area of Naxals in Chhattisgarh. And apart from Chhattisgarh, the bordering states of Chhattisgarh are also affected by Naxalism, like Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Telangana, Maharashtra. And apart from these states, there is West Bengal and Kerala, where there is some Naxalism left. So according to the Ministry of Home Affairs, the number of Naxal-affected districts have come down from 72 to 54. And a majority of these districts are from Chhattisgarh.
And talking about April 16th, can you tell us what exactly happened that day and how did the encounter unfold?
Yes, so the security forces had received information that the Dandakaryanya Special Zonal Committee members and the North Bastar Division members, they are taking a meeting in Abujmad. Among the security forces, there were the security forces comprised of Border Security Force and the District Reserve Guards. They started the operation a night before. They walked more than 15 to 20 kilometers through the jungles, and they managed to circle the Maoists on a hilltop. There were some 60 to 70 of them, in which 29 were killed. So the security forces are telling me that there were special zonal committee members present as well, but they managed to escape. But they gunned down 2 divisional committee members. One is Shankar Rao, who has more than 30 alleged cases on him, and then another woman called Lalita. Even she had several cases against her. And they knew the exact location, and that's how they were able to meticulously plan the entire operation.
And you mentioned that this was a massive encounter where 29 alleged Maoists were killed. So, have we seen an encounter of this scale before?
Not in the last 3 decades as per security forces, and that would mean almost from the beginning there is not been a operation in which 29 Maoists have been killed in a single encounter.
And Jayprakash, do we have a sense of what this operation means for the Maoist situation in the region?
So what is happening is unprecedented. So far, till date, 79 Maoists have been killed. And this figure is more than 3 times the number of Maoists who were killed last year. Some 24 Maoists were killed last year. So, from the figures, you can make out that what is happening is unprecedented. And it seems like it's a very clear message. Either you surrender or you be prepared to die.
Right. And what has been the government's response to this encounter? What kind of statements have been made regarding it?
Well, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has congratulated the security forces for their bravery, and he has said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is determined to end Naxalism soon, and the Deputy Chief Minister as well as the Home Minister of Chhattisgarh, Mr. Vijay Sharma, said that he is ready to have a dialogue or discussion with the Maoists, and he is even ready to speak with the Maoists on video call. On the other hand, Maoists have also released a statement on Vijay Sharma's offer, saying that they will not have a dialogue till they stop making new police camps and till they stop the anti-Naxal operations. As far as politics is also concerned, former Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel, he gave a media statement saying that some of these encounters are fake, and the number of fake encounters have gone up since the BJP has come to power.
And Jayprakash, you mentioned that this year itself, 79 Maoists have been killed. Has this raised concerns about human rights violations?
Yes. So the former Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel has already raised concerns. Before this, I think Bhupesh Baghel was speaking about a particular encounter in Kanker where 3 Maoists were killed, and the family members and the village sarpanch had marched to the police station saying that this encounter is fake. They were innocent villagers. Then there is this lawyer turned activist Bella Bhatia. She is based in Dantewada, and she has also been raising the issue of human rights violations time and again. And even she has said that some of these encounters have been fake. She's been vocal about it, and she's trying to provide legal help to the villagers, who she claims have been killed in fake encounters. We had taken up this issue with the security forces, and the Inspector General of Police for Bastar Range, Mr. Sundaraj P, had said that this is a typical modus operandi of Maoists, where they, say that we have been killing them in fake encounters, but it is not true. The Maoists who have been killed are militia members, and now these militia members, their work is to, be among the villagers and act as the eyes and ears of the Maoists. So, it's very easy for them. They take cover as a villager, but in reality, they are working for the Maoists. That's the reason why, such typical allegations of fake encounters come up. That's what the security forces have to say.
Right, and this encounter happened just a couple of days before the Lok Sabha polls. So what about the timing of this encounter stands out?
Well, it's a very clear message that has been given to the Maoists that they will have to surrender, or this kind of encounters will go on. Secondly, this encounter has come just a few days before the Lok Sabha elections. And so it's very clear that, the security forces are on the offensive. They want to push back the Naxals, and they want to ensure that there is no untoward incident during the Lok Sabha elections. Because if you remember, during the assembly polls, 2 security jawans were killed in IED blasts, one in Gariaband, which is not part of the Bastar region, but it's adjoining the Bastar region, and another in Kanker. And also there were like 5 to 6 firing incidents. And like every year, Maoists, they give a boycott call to the elections. So this time also, the police anticipated that they could be doing, some kind of attacks. So they went on the offensive. And secondly, the security forces also said that fighting these IEDs would be a big challenge and a threat to the security forces. Like 2 personnel were killed during the last elections, and they did start the demining exercises, and they found some 55 IEDs that were planted by the Maoists.
And Jayprakash, what does the encounter tell us about the security forces' strategy going forward?
Yeah, so as per the Inspector General, he said the main focus of the forces would be effective operations and better interstate operations. The second priority would be development, where they would want to connect the internal villages to the block level and then to the district level. And thirdly, it would be community outreach, because he said that the Maoists, they brainwashed the villagers, saying that the security forces and the government is here to steal your Jal, Jungle and Jameen, that is your water, land and forest. So they want to do away with this misconception. And he said that over the period of 10 to 20 years, they have been able to win the trust of villagers.
A quick note, shortly after this recording took place on Friday, it came to light that in Chhattisgarh's Bijapur district, a 32-year-old CRPF Jawan was killed in an IED blast near a polling booth. Also, in a separate IED blast, also in Bijapur, another CRPF man was injured. Both incidents took place under the Maoist-affected Bastar constituency, which went to polls that day. And in the end, we talk about elections in Maldives. Yesterday, Maldivians cast their votes in their parliamentary elections in a ballot that is crucial for President Mohamed Muizu, whose policies are closely monitored by India and China as they compete for influence in the nation. Both countries are vying for a foothold in the Maldives, which holds a strategic location in the Indian Ocean. Muizu's election as president last year intensified the rivalry between India and China, with the new leader taking a pro-China stance and taking action to remove Indian troops stationed on one of its country's islets. Muizu's presidential campaign theme was India Out, and it accused his predecessors of compromising national sovereignty by granting India too much influence. At least 75 Indian military personnel were stationed in the Maldives, and their known activities included operating 2 aircrafts donated by India and assisting in the rescue of people stranded or facing calamities at sea. Since then, Muizu has taken steps to transition these activities to civilian control. Relations further deteriorated when Indian social media activists launched a boycott campaign against Maldives tourism. This happened in retaliation for 3 Maldivian deputy ministers making derogatory statements about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for suggesting the promotion of tourism in Lakshadweep. According to recent Maldives government statistics, the number of Indian tourists have declined, causing the country to drop from being the top source of foreign visitors to the 6th place. Naidu visited China earlier this year and negotiated an increase in the number of tourists and inbound flights from China. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.